Welcome to the Explainer. Let's just jump right in. I want you to picture this. It's October 13th, 1944. You're standing in a freezing, pitch-black stone cellar on Adalbertstrasse, right in the medieval heart of Aachen, Germany. A German soldier from the 246th Infantry Division is pressing his back against the wall. He's listening. He's been trained to wait for the sound of American boots on the stairs, right? To wait for a silhouette in the doorway and then open fire. Because the doorway is how infantry takes a building. It's how it's literally always been done. He's been hearing artillery for 2 days straight, but suddenly there's just silence. And then the solid masonry wall behind him completely explodes. Not the door, not the staircase, the actual wall he was leaning against 30 seconds ago. Before the dust even clears, American soldiers are already shouting for him to drop his weapon. They aren't trying to enter the room, they're already inside. Now, across post-war interrogations, German troops kept coming back to this single word to describe what happened: incomprehensible. So the core mystery we're unraveling today is this. How exactly did American infantrymen, guys who had never set foot in a German city before, move through a 1,000-year-old maze of stone like they were holding architectural blueprints to every single room? Okay, so to really grasp this, we have to look at what military doctrine actually said at the time. Back in 1939, pretty much every army on Earth agreed that cities heavily favored the defender. The golden rule was simple: treat a city like a giant landmine and just go around it. And honestly, the original American plan was exactly that: encircle Aachen and just wait them out. But reality shifted. Adolf Hitler declared Aachen a fortress city, meaning it had to be held at all costs. So suddenly, the Americans couldn't just go around. They had to go straight through this medieval maze of meter-thick stone walls and interconnected sewers. And historically speaking, that kind of urban meat grinder predicted casualty rates of 50% or even higher. Well, this is where Lieutenant Colonel Darrell M. Daniel of the 26th Infantry Regiment steps in. He knew that sending his men, a lot of them just fresh replacements, into this nightmare using traditional tactics would mean losing almost all of them in a week. So he made a pretty radical pivot. He lived by a very simple motto: sweat and preparation would save 2nd Battalion blood in combat. And he didn't just mean doing more target practice. He meant arming his guys with a level of information the German defenders couldn't even fathom. He was basically going to turn the fog of urban war into mathematical certainty. So let's look at the first piece of this puzzle. System 1. Eyes over the city. To understand how they completely rewrote urban combat, we've got to start with their macro-level intelligence. The Americans were processing an absolutely unfathomable amount of visual data, and they did it in 3 precise steps. First, F-5 Lightnings photographed the city from 30,000 feet up. Next, this highly specialized unit called the Aerial Photography Interpretation Detachment, or APID, took these stereoscopic prints and overlaid them directly onto existing street maps. Finally, and this is the really crucial part, they plotted every single German defensive position. We're talking anti-tank obstacles, trenches, mobile artillery, and they dated them daily. If a German unit moved an anti-aircraft gun on a Tuesday, the American infantry had a map showing that exact new position printed out in Belgium by Wednesday. But here's the thing, right? Photographs from 30,000 feet up can't exactly see inside buildings, so they layered this with something else. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just brilliant, it was an incredible stroke of luck. Major Floyd W. Huff and his 19-man intel unit, codenamed How Team, walked into this bombed-out university library right on the edge of the city. And sitting right there, they found files the retreating Germans had tied up but completely failed to evacuate. It was the German army's own highly precise geodetic survey data. The Americans microfilmed the whole thing on the spot. They were quite literally using the enemy's own geographical math to perfect their artillery targeting. All right, moving on to System 2, the measle map system. So having all this macro intelligence is awesome, but how do you make it useful for a terrified 19-year-old kid getting shot at in a totally foreign city? Daniel created what became known as the measle map. He took that master map, which was just covered in red intelligence dots, and numbered every single intersection and key building in his battalion zone. It honestly looked like the map had caught the measles. But think about how smart this is. In the sheer chaos of combat, radio operators were constantly garbling complicated, unpronounceable German street names. With the measle map, an infantryman didn't have to try and describe where the fire was coming from. He literally just shouted, "Building 47" or "Intersection 14." And what happened when they called out one of those numbers? Well, I want you to let this number sink in for a second. 74. There were 74 separate artillery batteries supporting a single American battalion of roughly 900 men. To put that into perspective, that is a mind-bending World War I level concentration of firepower, just handed over to a single battalion commander. But having all that firepower is kind of useless if you don't know how to apply it. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel coined a pretty ruthless battle cry for his unit: knock them all down. During rehearsals, he taught his men to be patient. When a platoon called out a building number, the artillery rained down so incredibly accurately that the infantry could stand just 40 yards away. The sheer weight of those 155mm shells would collapse the defensive structure before the infantry ever even had to clear it. The Germans inside couldn't aim. They were too busy just trying to hide from the collapsing stone. Now, for this whole grid to actually work, the Americans had to lock the city down into a closed pocket, and that required some unbelievable individual bravery. Enter Captain Bobby Brown. On October 8th, he single-handedly attacked Crucifix Hill. Armed with pole charges, he crawled under heavy fire, blowing up pillbox after pillbox, securing the high ground even after being wounded multiple times. His heroics are what closed the ring around Aachen, trapping the defenders inside and making the missile map a fully weaponized, inescapable grid. Which brings us to the final piece, System 3, the wall as a door. So the intel told them where the enemy was, and the missile map let them blast the buildings. But eventually, the infantry still has to physically advance. Let's walk through this terrifying timeline from the perspective of the German defender again. You hear voices outside, so you aim your rifle at the doorway. Out of nowhere, the solid wall behind you explodes. Instantly, a grenade clatters down the stairs from the doorway you were originally watching. And before you can even process what's happening, American assault teams are pouring in from 3 different directions. See, the Americans weren't reading blueprints to find the doors. They were actively ignoring the doorways because they knew doorways were death traps. They called this tactic mouse holing, and it was heavily refined and codified into official doctrine. Combat engineers used specialized demo charges to just blow straight through meter-thick masonry. But it gets even wilder than that. They brought up M12 155mm self-propelled howitzers. These are huge weapons meant to hit targets miles away, and they've fired them point blank at ranges of under 300 yards. By using time delay fuses, these massive shells would punch through 3, 4, or even 5 adjacent row houses before finally detonating, instantly linking them all into one continuous interior tunnel. And if a building was just too tough, they simply removed it from the map entirely. There's this one specific instance where American troops were taking heavy sniper fire from a concrete-reinforced church steeple. Tank rounds were literally just bouncing right off of it. So instead of sending guys in to clear it floor by terrifying floor, they brought up a 155mm gun. One single shell completely erased the steeple. The whole sniper problem was solved without a single American ever setting foot inside that structure. So, where does this leave us? Section 4, the ultimate verdict. What actually happens when you combine real-time aerial intelligence, a numbered artillery grid, and an infantry force that treats solid walls like mere suggestions? The final tally tells a pretty staggering story. By the doctrinal standards of the time, the 26th Infantry Regiment should have been completely decimated. Instead, they suffered just 498 casualties taking the central city. Now compare that to the German garrison. 2 entire divisions were destroyed, and nearly 6,000 prisoners were taken in just 9 days. Hitler's fortress city, defended by troops who thought they had every possible advantage of urban terrain, just totally collapsed. So, to quickly summarize this brilliant 3-pronged system, the stereoscopic maps and captured survey data revealed the exact enemy positions. The missile map turned every complex street into a simple numerical coordinate for massive artillery strikes. And tactical demolitions turned impenetrable walls into instant doors. The German soldiers were completely baffled because they assumed the Americans had somehow magically memorized the room layouts. But the reality was much harsher. The Americans didn't memorize the layouts at all. They made the layouts completely irrelevant. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The German defenders were fundamentally asking the wrong question. They kept asking, how did they know our rooms? The real question they should have been asking is this: when did the Americans stop fighting cities as physical objects and start fighting them as pure information problems? You see, Aachen wasn't conquered with just rifles and bravery. It was systematically dismantled by an industrial-scale system of data, geometry, and overwhelming precision. It's an absolutely stunning reframing of how wars are actually won. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the history you think you know.